Hello, 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 and welcome to another all new episode of Desperate for Attention. I am your host, Leslie Simon, and I know I say this way too much, but this time that we spent together, you and me, it has been the best, simply the best. Some might even say better than all the rest. I mean, aside from the overly hangry mosquitoes, this unusual Los Angeles humidity, my lingering dance aerobics injury, and probably a dozen other peccadillos that would likely harsh any mellow you happen to have right now, I can say without hesitation that this time we spend together every week for this podcast has been the absolute highlight of my summer. As Dashboard Confessional would say, hands down, this is the best time I can ever remember. I'm going to save you from any pre-fall housekeeping and simply say you can find Desperate for Attention on your favorite podcasting platform, in addition to other social platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube. So if you aren't already doing one or all of the things, I'd suggest you subscribe, rate, share, follow, and or leave us a comment. So for today's episode, I'm about to get really emo, so consider yourself warned. Not only will we be discussing the current state of the scene, but I should also mention that this episode marks the end of season 2. Can you believe it? Over the past few months, we've time traveled through redemption arcs for once hated bands like Third Eye Blind and Counting Crows. We've discovered how mall punk conquered America twice thanks to Good Charlotte, and unraveled why today's music sometimes feels like emo archaeology because we're digging through decades of songs to find something that feels both familiar and impossibly new. If you missed an episode, I lovingly encourage you to go back and give them a listen because just like NBC said in the 90s, when Must See TV ran a bunch of Seinfeld reruns, if you haven't heard them, then it's new to you. Again, I can't thank you enough for joining me this season. You've been more loyal than a Warped Tour crowd singing every word of Ohio is for Lovers. And honestly, without you, this show would just be me screaming into the void like a live journal entry nobody wants to read. Your support has been absolutely chef's kiss, or should I say, absolutely emo kid finger guns. And I'm genuinely grateful for every listen, every share, every moment that you've chosen to spend in this nostalgic rabbit hole with me. So, for our season 2 finale, we are diving headfirst into something that's been on my mind for many a month. Why emo isn't just alive in 2025, but thriving in ways that might have made 2004 jealous. We're going to be talking about how a genre that was supposedly dead keeps reinventing itself, why Gen Z discovered My Chemical Romance like they discovered fire, and just how emo became the soundtrack to surviving everything from global pandemics to TikTok algorithms. So, dear listener, lean back, get comfy, and let's talk about why emo refuses to stay buried. Turns out death becomes it. My fellow emo kids and elders, the state of our union is complicated. I come to you today not as your head of state, though honestly running a campaign on a platform of smudged black eyeliner and affordable therapy sounds pretty good right now. But as someone who's spent the better part of 2 decades watching everyone declare this genre dead, while it quietly took over the entire emotional landscape of modern culture. We need to talk about what's actually happening here, because there's this weird disconnect between what people say about the scene and what's actually going down. Every few months, some music journalist writes another think piece about whether emo is back or dead or having a moment, as if this genre operates on the same revival cycle as oversized aviator sunglasses or Steve Madden's slinky black sandals. Meanwhile, My Chemical Romance is selling out arenas on a tour that's been extended multiple times because demand keeps breaking venue capacity records. Hayley Williams just dropped new solo material that had the entire internet in shambles. And the All American Rejects are literally playing in people's living rooms because they wanted to get back to those intimate basement show vibes that made everyone fall in love with this music in the first place. But here's what's really wild. While legacy acts are proving their staying power, an entire generation of kids who weren't even born when Three Cheers for Sweet Revenge came out are discovering these songs on TikTok and having the same emotional breakdowns that we had 15 years ago. They're feeling genuine connection to lyrics about suburban angst and romantic devastation, even though their reference point are completely different from ours. So, what's really going on here? How did a genre that supposedly peaked in 2006 end up being the emotional blueprint for everything from bedroom pop to therapy culture to whatever Mitski is doing that makes everyone cry in their car? Today, we're conducting a comprehensive review of where this scene actually stands, how it got here, and why the reports of its death have been greatly exaggerated. We're talking authenticity debates that get more tangled than a dashboard confessional lyric, international scenes that prove emotional hardcore translates across every language barrier, and the weird ways technology both threatens and amplifies the intimacy that makes this music matter. Because here's the reality check: emo didn't die and come back, it never left. It just evolved, expanded, and infiltrated every corner of contemporary music while everyone was busy arguing about whether it counts as real emo if you discovered it through an algorithm instead of a burned CD your cousin from Long Island made you. The state of our union? Stronger than anyone wants to admit, more influential than anyone gives it credit for, and absolutely refusing to stay dead, no matter how many obituaries get written. Let's break it down. I've got to say, the numbers don't lie, even when the narrative does. Spotify's 2024 year-end data showed that songs tagged as emo or pop punk were streamed over 4.8 billion times globally. For context, that's more than the entire gross domestic product of some small countries converted into emotional catharsis. My Chemical Romance's Welcome to the Black Parade alone has been streamed over 800 million times on Spotify. And that's just one platform for one song from a band that supposedly represents a dead genre. But streaming numbers only tell part of the story. What's really fascinating is where the music is finding audiences. We're seeing massive engagement from countries that never had traditional alternative rock radio stations, places like Brazil, Mexico, the Philippines, and Eastern European nations, where kids are building entire scenes around music they discovered through YouTube recommendations and Instagram posts. Take Japan's math rock scene, which has essentially perfected emotional instrumental music to a degree that makes American post rock bands look like they're playing with safety scissors. Bands like Toe and Light are creating these incredibly intricate compositions that capture all the emotional complexity of traditional songwriting without needing a single word. They're proving that the feelings don't need English lyrics to translate universally. Latin American countries have developed their own interpretations that blend traditional hardcore aggression with regional musical influences, creating sounds that feel both completely familiar and entirely fresh. Mexican bands are incorporating mariachi instrumentation into breakdowns. Brazilian groups are mixing bossa nova rhythms with screaming vocals. It's like watching the genre learn new languages while maintaining its core emotional vocabulary. The cultural infiltration goes way deeper than the music charts, though. Walk into any Target and you'll find graphic tees featuring Misfits Crimson Ghost or 30 Seconds to Mars Triad Smear logo being bought by teenagers who treat vintage band merch like designer fashion. Hot Topic went from being the exclusive domain of suburban mall goths to a mainstream retailer that stocks everything from 21 Pilots hoodies to Squishmallows. More significantly, the emotional intelligence that defined classic songwriting has become the foundation of contemporary therapy culture. Those lyrics that taught us it was okay to feel complicated emotions about relationships, family dynamics, and mental health, they were essentially emotional education disguised as three-chord progressions. Now we live in a world where vulnerability is treated as a strength rather than a weakness, where people casually discuss their trauma responses and attachment styles, where emotional labor is part of the everyday vernacular. Gen Z discovered these concepts through TikTok therapists and Instagram infographics, but millennials learned them from Dashboard Confessional and Taking Back Sunday. Different delivery systems, but the same fundamental lessons about processing feelings instead of suppressing them. The platform algorithms have created this weird democratization where a 15-year-old can discover sunny day real estate, American football, and turnstile in the same afternoon without needing to understand their chronological relationship or subcultural significance. They're not experiencing these bands as part of a historical progression. They're experiencing them as a contemporary option in an infinite emotional jukebox. If you want to hear more about how music is existing in the past, present, and future at the same time, now is a good time to bookmark our two-part series, Playlist Paralysis, Why 2025 Sounds Like Everything. But I digress. All of this has created some tension with older fans who lived through the era where finding new bands required actual effort and social connections. There's this ongoing authenticity debate about whether algorithmic discovery counts the same way as getting a burned CD from someone who thought you needed to hear these songs immediately. But honestly, that gatekeeping misses the point entirely. What matters isn't how someone discovers the music, it's whether they connect with its emotional content. A kid who finds screaming infidelities through a TikTok video and starts crying because it perfectly captures how they feel about their first major heartbreak is having the exact same experience we had, just through a different technological medium. What I'm saying is that the emotions are real regardless of the delivery system. The genre has also expanded its definition in ways that would have seemed impossible during its supposed heyday. Artists like Phoebe Bridgers, Soccer Mommy, and Japanese Breakfast are making music that captures all the introspective vulnerability of classic material while incorporating folk, indie pop, and experimental elements. They're not trying to sound like bands from 2003, they're just applying those emotional approaches to the contemporary musical landscape. Even mainstream pop artists have absorbed these influences. Artists like Olivia Rodrigo, who had massive success with songs like Driver's License and Good For You, which proved that confessional songwriting about teen emotional drama could dominate the charts just as effectively as it dominated Warped Tour lineups. She's essentially making radio friendly versions of the same themes that defined underground scenes, reaching audiences who might not have ever discovered those influences otherwise. Hip hop artists are also incorporating similar approaches to emotional vulnerability. Artists like Juice WRLD built their entire careers on combining trap beats with deeply personal lyrics about mental health struggles, relationship anxiety, and existential uncertainty. Again, it's a different genre, but the same emotional toolkit. So, what we're seeing isn't a revival or a comeback, it's evolution and expansion. The core values that made this music meaningful have not changed. It's still authenticity over artifice, emotional honesty over performative coolness, community connection over mainstream validation. But the ways those values get expressed have multiplied across genres, platforms, and international scenes. The emo scene today is simultaneously more niche and more mainstream than it's ever been. More niche because streaming allows for incredibly specific subgenres to find their audiences. I mean, you can spend months deep diving into Midwest style twinkly guitars or East Coast melodic hardcore without ever running out of bands to discover. More mainstream because those emotional approaches have influenced everything from bedroom pop to contemporary country music. So, where do we actually stand? We're in this fascinating moment where the genre's influence is everywhere, but its identity remains somewhat underground. Everyone's absorbed in its lessons about emotional intelligence and authentic expression, but most people still think of it as something that happened in the past rather than something that's actively shaping contemporary culture. It's that disconnect between perception and reality that's exactly why we need this presidential address. Because while everyone's been busy writing obituaries, the scene has been quietly conducting one of the most successful cultural infiltrations in modern music history. Before we go any further, let's address the elephant in the venue. The accessibility problem that's been tearing this community apart faster than a mosh pit when someone plays cute without the E. Every scene has its purists, but the intensity level around what constitutes real emo has reached academic thesis levels of pedantic. We've got people creating elaborate classification systems that read like doctoral dissertations. First wave, second wave, revival, post revival, Midwest style, Long Island style, emotional hardcore, screamo, and approximately 17 other subcategories that require a flowchart to navigate. The core tension boils down to this: older fans who discovered bands through word of mouth networks, burned CDs, the actual human recommendation, versus newer fans who found the same music through TikTok algorithms, Spotify playlists, and Instagram posts. Both groups are having genuine emotional responses to identical songs, but somehow the discovery method has become grounds for questioning authenticity. Some may say peak absurdity was reached when American football reunited in 2014. Suddenly, everyone became an expert on whether their new material measured up to their 1999 self titled album, an album that most people ignored when it actually came out. The band that defined an entire aesthetic approach to introspective indie rock was getting criticized for not sounding exactly like they did when they were college students, as if personal growth and musical evolution were betrayals of their artistic mission. But here's what that reunion actually proved. The demand was massive, sustained, and came from multiple generations at the same time. Their shows weren't just nostalgic victory laps for aging millennials. They were packed with teens who discovered Neverment through YouTube recommendations and felt the same emotional connection to those twinkly guitar patterns and vulnerable lyrics that hit us 20 years earlier. The revival label itself has become part of the problem. When journalists start calling contemporary bands revival acts, it immediately creates this hierarchy where current artists got positioned as tribute bands rather than legitimate inheritors of an ongoing tradition. Bands like Modern Baseball, The Wonder Years, and Joyce Manor weren't trying to recreate 2004. They were applying those emotional approaches to their current experiences, using contemporary production techniques and addressing issues that felt relevant to their generation. Calling it a revival implies the original thing died, which is exactly the misconception we're trying to correct here. You don't revive something that never stopped existing. You evolve it, expand it, and find new ways to express the same fundamental human experiences that made it meaningful in the first place. The TikTok discovery debate represents the most revealing aspect of these authenticity wars. There's this underlying assumption that algorithmic discovery is somehow less legitimate than organic word of mouth, as if the emotional impact gets diminished because a machine learning system introduced you to the song instead of your one friend with really bomb taste in music. But think about what's actually happening when someone discovers I'm Not Okay, I Promise through a 15-second TikTok clip. They hear that powerful opening guitar riff, get immediately curious, seek out the full song, probably end up diving into the entire album, and maybe start exploring the band's whole catalog. That journey from algorithmic introduction to deep emotional connection mirrors exactly what happened when someone handed you a burned CD with, "You need to hear this," scrawled across it in Sharpie. The platform changes, but the emotional process remains the same: curiosity, discovery, connection, community. What's really threatening about TikTok discovery isn't that it's less authentic, it's that it's more efficient. Instead of needing social connections to underground scenes, anyone with internet access can stumble across the most emotionally resonant music ever created. That democratization makes some people uncomfortable because it removes the social capital that came from being early adopters or having superior taste. The most productive way forward involves recognizing that authenticity isn't about discovery method or subcultural credentials. It's about emotional honesty and a community connection. A 15-year-old who finds solace in brand new 70 times 7 after a friendship betrayal is having a real organic experience, regardless of whether they know it's a response track to There's No I in Teen by Taking Back Sunday. What makes this music authentic isn't its adherence to specific aesthetic requirements or discovery protocols. It's its commitment to processing genuine human emotions through musical expression. Whether someone found the music through a basement show in 2004 or through a TikTok algorithm in 2025, the authenticity wars often miss the most important point. This music keeps finding people who need it, and they keep finding ways to build community around shared emotional experiences. That's no threat to authenticity. That's proof that authenticity endures across platforms, generations, and discovery methods. The songs work because the feelings they address are universal and ongoing. Everything else is just technological logistics. But speaking of technological logistics, the tension between digital efficiency and emotional intimacy is reshaping everything about how these communities function, and often in ways that challenge the genre's foundational values. That collision between technological innovation and human connection is creating entirely new questions about what it means to build authentic relationships through music. So let's try to answer a few of them. When bands from Champaign, Illinois, and New Brunswick, New Jersey were crafting songs about suburban alienation and relationship uncertainty in the late 90s, they probably weren't thinking about how those feelings would translate to teenagers in Tokyo, Sao Paulo, or Warsaw. But emotions don't need passports, and a language barrier that should theoretically limit global reach simply doesn't exist. Emotion transcends linguistics, and these compositions communicate feelings more directly than many lyrical approaches. That's why a teenager in Mexico City can feel the same cathartic release during a breakdown as someone in Philadelphia, because that emotional architecture is universal. What's particularly striking about these international scenes is how they've adapted the aesthetic while maintaining core emotional values. European interpretations have developed their own characteristics, particularly in Germany and Eastern European countries, where the post communist generation found deep resonance with themes of alienation and emotional authenticity. German bands approach the sound with typical precision, creating meticulously crafted compositions that explore similar emotional territories through different cultural lenses. Polish and Czech bands have built thriving scenes around music that addresses the psychological aftermath of major societal transitions. They're using these emotional frameworks to process collective trauma and cultural displacement in ways that feel both deeply personal and broadly relatable. The UK's relationship with the genre has always been complicated. Their musical culture tends to favor either polished pop or abrasive punk, without much middle ground for introspective alt rock. But younger British artists are finally embracing vulnerability in ways that previous generations might have dismissed as overly sentimental. Bands like Holding Absence are creating music that combines British post hardcore aggression with emotional directness. Then you have Argentina's scene, which has exploded over the past 5 years, with bands like No Terror and El Bang Bang building massive followings by addressing local political frustrations and social anxieties through familiar emotional frameworks. They're proving that you can tackle completely different subject matter: economic instability, government corruption, social inequality, by using the same musical approaches that originally emerged from American suburban dissatisfaction. The internet has obviously facilitated this global expansion, but what's remarkable is how each regional scene has developed its own identity rather than simply copying American templates. Local bands aren't just translating English lyrics, they are adapting the emotional approaches to address their own cultural contexts and social realities. Streaming platforms have created opportunities for cross pollination that would have been near impossible during the genre's original era. A band from Sweden can influence artists in South Korea who might collaborate with musicians from Chile, creating hybrid sounds that reflect this new global connectivity. Festival circuits have expanded internationally as well, with events like Arctangent in the UK, Complexity Fest in the Netherlands, and various iterations across Asia, providing platforms for these regional scenes to connect with much broader audiences. These aren't just revival shows featuring legacy acts. They're showcasing contemporary artists who are pushing the genre forward while maintaining its core emo mission. The standardization of recording technology has also been crucial for this global expansion. Bedroom recording setups that would have cost thousands of dollars 20 years ago are now accessible to teens anywhere with basic internet access. This has enabled scenes to develop in places that lack traditional music industry infrastructure, creating more diverse and authentic regional variations. What emerges from this global perspective is recognition that the feelings this music addresses, like that of alienation, romantic uncertainty, social anxiety, or the search for authentic connection, are genuinely universal human experiences. The specific cultural contexts change, but the underlying emotional needs remain the same through different societies and economic systems. This international expansion also challenges American assumptions about cultural ownership and artistic authenticity. When musicians from completely different cultural backgrounds develop innovative approaches to familiar sounds, it becomes clear that cultural influence flows in multiple directions rather than simply radiating outward from original sources. The global reach of these emotional frameworks prove that authenticity isn't tied to geographic origin or cultural background. It's about commitment to honest expression and community connection. Remember that teen in Mexico City that we mentioned at the beginning of the segment? Well, she can have just as legitimate a relationship with this music as someone who grew up in the Philly suburbs where many foundational bands originated. The irony, though, is that as this music spreads across continents and builds these deeply personal connections between strangers separated by oceans, the very technology enabling this global community is simultaneously threatening the intimate human scale experiences that make the genre meaningful in the first place. A kid in Seoul might discover their favorite band through an algorithm, But that same algorithmic mediation is fundamentally changing what it means to stumble upon something that feels personally significant. The tools that connect us globally might be disconnecting us locally. And that tension is reshaping not just how we find music, but how we relate to it emotionally. The bedroom recording revolution has fundamentally altered the DNA of how this music gets made, but not necessarily in the ways you might expect. When My Chemical Romance recorded The Black Parade in 2006, they needed professional studio time, experienced engineers, and expensive equipment to achieve those layered atmospheric textures. Today, a teenager with access to GarageBand and a decent microphone can create similarly complex soundscapes from their actual bedroom, which sounds democratizing until you realize what gets lost in that translation. The intimacy that defined classic material wasn't just about confessional lyrics. It was about the physical constraints of the recording process itself. Limited studio time forced bands to perform together, to work through emotional tension in real time, to capture the kind of human spontaneity that can't be programmed or edited into perfection. When every mistake can be fixed with a mouse click, when vocals can be recorded line by line until they're technically flawless, something essential about the emotional messiness gets sanitized away. Today's bedroom pop artists like Clairo and Boy Pablo have mastered the aesthetic of intimacy, the lo-fi production, the vulnerable lyrics, the dreamy textures, but their music often lacks the raw urgency that made original material feel like emotional life or death communication. Sure, it's beautifully crafted, but it doesn't sound like someone desperately trying to figure out their feelings immediately after they feel them. The TikTok discovery paradox presents an even more complex challenge to the genre's foundational values. 15-second clips are introducing millions of people to songs that were designed to unfold slowly, to build emotional investment over 3 or 4 minutes, to reward patient listening with cathartic payoffs. When Welcome to the Black Parade goes viral on TikTok, new listeners are experiencing those opening piano notes completely divorced from the song's dramatic arc. The quiet build, the explosive entrance of the full band, the way Gerard Way's vocals escalate from vulnerable cry to commanding wail. They're getting a snapshot instead of a full journey, which changes the entire emotional impact. But something interesting happens when those TikTok listeners seek out the full songs. Many of them end up appreciating the complete experience even more because they've been primed to expect something significant. The algorithm serves as an appetizer that makes them hungry for the full meal, which suggests that attention spans aren't actually shrinking, they're just getting more selective about what deserves extended engagement. Virtual intimacy presents another fascinating contradiction. During the pandemic, countless artists live streamed performances from their bedrooms, basements, and living rooms, attempting to recreate the intimate connection of underground shows through digital mediation. Some of these virtual concerts captured genuine emotional moments, artists vulnerable in their personal spaces, and audiences sharing real time reactions through chat functions. But the physical experience of being in a crowded basement, feeling the bass frequencies through your chest, making eye contact with the singer during a particularly intense lyric, bumping into sweaty strangers who become temporary emotional allies. Well, none of that translates through a computer screen. The communal catharsis that defines live experiences remains fundamentally tied to physical proximity and shared space. The most successful contemporary artists seem to be those who figured out how to navigate these technological constraints while maintaining authentic emotional connection. They use bedroom recording capabilities to create intimate textures, but they don't let the quest to be perfect replace spontaneity. They engage with social media to build community, but they don't let algorithmic optimization override artistic vision. The challenge moving forward involves preserving the elements that made this music culturally significant, like the emotional vulnerability, the community connection, the patient development of complex feelings, while adapting to technological realities that often work against those values. The technology itself isn't inherently bad or good, but it does create different possibilities and constraints that artists and audiences need to navigate consciously. What's becoming clear is that the most meaningful contemporary music emerges from artists who understand these technological possibilities while refusing to be entirely determined by them. They use bedroom recording capabilities to create intimate textures, but they don't let the quest for perfection replace spontaneity. They engage with social media to build community, but they don't let algorithmic optimization override artistic vision. They appreciate streaming accessibility while recognizing that some emotional experiences require sustained attention and just can't be reduced to viral moments. The tension between technological efficiency and human intimacy isn't going away, but it is forcing everyone involved, like artists, audiences, and industry professionals, to think more deliberately about what makes musical experiences meaningful and how those values can be preserved across different delivery systems. The tools keep changing, but the need for authentic emotional connection through music remains constant across every technological revolution.
Your hair is everywhere, screaming infidelities, taking it where. Your hair, it's everywhere, screaming infidelities, taking it where.
Let's talk about the most profound shift this scene has witnessed. That's the transformation from crime or mockery to therapy culture validation, and why this genre basically wrote the handbook for emotional intelligence 20 years before anyone started using the abbreviation EQ in conversation. Cast your minds back to 2005 when Dashboard Confessional's Chris Carrabba was getting roasted by music critics for being too sensitive and overly dramatic. The same lyrics that had thousands of kids singing along about their feelings were dismissed as whiny self indulgence by adults who apparently thought emotional expression was a character flaw rather than a life skill. Fast forward to 2025, and vulnerability has become a legitimate superpower. Everyone's discussing their attachment styles on first dates. Instagram therapists are breaking down trauma responses in carousel posts. Corporate wellness programs include meditation and mental health days. The emotional vocabulary that once marked you as weak has become essential cultural currency. Now, this transformation didn't happen in a vacuum. An entire generation learned emotional literacy through 3-minute songs about relationship anxiety, family dysfunction, and the complexity of growing up. While mainstream culture was still operating under the assumption that feelings were private matters to be handled individually, this music was creating communal spaces for processing complicated emotions. The therapeutic value of emo music has also become increasingly recognized by mental health professionals. Music therapists incorporate some of our favorite songs into treatment approaches, recognizing that familiar melodies and relatable lyrics can provide entry points for discussions that might otherwise feel too threatening or abstract. What's particularly powerful about this evolution is how it's influenced broader culture conversations about masculinity and emotional expression. The scene has always included male artists who weren't afraid to cry or to admit uncertainty or to express feelings that traditional masculine roles typically discourage. As those artists have aged and continued making music, they've modeled emotional maturity in ways that challenge harmful stereotypes. This mental health revolution represents one of the genre's most significant cultural contributions. It's proof that music designed to help people process their feelings can actually change how entire societies approach emotional wellness. The kids who learned emotional vocabulary from Dashboard Confessional grew up to become therapists, teachers, and parents who prioritize emotional intelligence in ways their own parents might not have understood. The ripple effects extend far beyond this music. The corporate mental health initiatives, the destigmatization of therapy, the cultural permission to discuss anxiety and depression openly. All of this connects back to the communities that insisted emotional honesty was strength rather than weakness, that feelings deserved attention rather than dismissal, and that vulnerability could create connection instead of isolation. But while this emotional revolution has been transforming how we process feelings, the musical landscape itself has been undergoing equally dramatic changes. The genre's influence has spread so far beyond its original boundaries that tracking its DNA requires mapping entirely new territories.
I wanna know, will you be mine? 'Cause if you can't, don't waste your time. 'Cause you deserve to be with someone like me, baby girl. Will you be mine?
The future of this scene isn't about predicting which bands will break through or which sounds will dominate the next decade. It's about understanding how the core values that made this music culturally significant can survive and adapt to whatever technological, economic, and social changes emerge. Sustainability represents perhaps the most immediate challenge. The streaming economy that has democratized music discovery has also made it nearly impossible for artists to earn living wages from recorded music alone. Contemporary artists have gotten very creative about navigating these economic constraints, embracing subscription models like Patreon, and developing merchandise lines that function as wearable art. The most interesting experiments also involve artists who are finding ways to scale intimacy by creating larger shows that still feel super personal. Take the Wonder Years, for example, and their recent arena tour, which included acoustic segments where the entire venue got quiet enough to hear individual voices singing along, proving that size doesn't have to eliminate an intimate connection to the audience. Climate anxiety, economic uncertainty, and political polarization are creating new forms of collective trauma that will require new musical responses. The personal introspection that characterized earlier emo generations will need to likely expand into social and environmental themes while maintaining the emotional honesty that makes the music connect with individual listeners. But perhaps the most important factor for future sustainability isn't technological or economic. It's actually cultural. The values that made this music significant, the emotional authenticity, the community support, the rejection of performative coolness, will only remain relevant as long as humans struggle with feelings of alienation, romantic uncertainty, and the search for meaningful connection. And so, my fellow citizens of this emotional republic, the state of our union is resilient, evolving, and more influential than anyone wants to acknowledge. Here, we've traced the journey from basement shows and college towns to global streaming dominance, from crybaby mockery to therapy culture validation, from regional American scenes to international movements that prove feelings truly are the universal human language. What emerges from this comprehensive review is recognition that we're not experiencing a revival or a comeback. We are witnessing the ongoing maturation of a cultural movement that fundamentally changed how contemporary society approaches emotional authenticity. So the authenticity debates that sometimes divide our community miss the larger picture. This music, our music, keeps finding people who need it, regardless of how they discover it or which platforms they use to share it. The global expansion has proven that the feelings this music addresses transcend cultural boundaries and economic systems. And the mental health revolution represents our most significant cultural contribution thus far. The challenges we face involve maintaining authentic community values while adapting to economic realities that make sustainable artistic careers increasingly difficult. But the same resilience that carried this movement through multiple technological transitions will surely enable future adaptations. Emo as an underground genre that supposedly peaked 15 years ago has actually spent the last decade conducting a pretty successful cultural infiltration, and one that no one seemed to notice despite it happening in plain sight. Every therapy session that uses musical metaphors, every streaming playlist organized around emotional themes, every contemporary artist who prioritizes lyrical vulnerability provides evidence of this quiet revolution. As I said earlier, the reports of our death have been greatly exaggerated. We didn't die and come back. We never left. We just evolved, expanded, and quietly infiltrated every corner of contemporary culture while everyone else was busy writing our obituaries. The scenes that matter most aren't happening in mainstream media coverage. They're happening in basements and bedrooms and small venues around the world, where young artists continue discovering that vulnerable expression can create meaningful community connections. Our influence measures itself not in chart positions or festival headlines, but in cultural shifts towards emotional intelligence, authentic expression, and community support. The kids who learned to process feelings through 3-minute songs grew up to create a world where vulnerability is strength, where therapy is normalized, and where emotional honesty matters more than artificial coolness. My fellow emo kids and elders, the future of our movement isn't about recreating the past. It's about carrying forward the principles that made this music matter, while finding new ways to help people process the complexity of being human in an increasingly complicated world. The state of our union is resilient. The state of our union is evolving. The state of our union is here to stay. If you take nothing else from this conversation, stay vulnerable, stay connected, and stay human. That's a wrap on another all-new episode and the final episode of Season 2 of Desperate for Attention. I'm still Leslie Simon, and honestly, I'm still a little emotional that we've reached the end of this particular journey together. And while I can't promise you'll find me on your calendar next week, that's because even podcast hosts need some time to process their feelings and maybe search for mint condition Swatch Watch twin phones on eBay. It's a thing. Go look at them. They're amazing. I can absolutely promise that season 3 is already brewing in my beautifully chaotic brain. So if you aren't already following Desperate for Attention on your podcast platform of choice, now is the perfect time to hit subscribe and follow so you will be the first to know when we're back with fresh episodes and probably even more nostalgic spiral content. Don't forget to leave a comment and make sure your notifications are turned on because trust me, you do not want to miss the season 3 announcement. Our social platforms will still have a pretty strong heartbeat, so if you are someone who can't stop scrolling on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, be sure to follow us at Desperate for Attention Pod. Finally, if season 2 has meant anything to you, like if it's made your commute less boring or your workout more bearable or your nostalgic heart feel just a little less alone, do me the ultimate solid and tell all your friends and basically everyone you know. So share it with your besties, your coworkers, that one Amazon delivery driver who really goes the extra mile to put your package behind the gate, and anyone who passes the next bedchill test or hell, even knows what the bedchill test is. Until we meet again in season 3, this is Desperate for Attention. I'm Leslie Simon, and I'll smell you later.
You're simply